Welcome, welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot b'divrei. So we had come across this really interesting statement, right? And I'll go over it again, right? Ve'et hanefesh, right? This is a reference to what Abraham and Sarah mentioned them both. Took the nefesh she'amasu b'charan, right? The souls that they had made, literally it means in Haran, and that's understood to mean here et hanefesh asher asu b'charan, right? And it refers to the people who converted to Abraham. So there's that idea of Abraham sharing his discovery, right, of God, and the idea of this, you know, transcendent, single, transcendent, divine cause of all causes in the universe. And there were people, and not only that, but that we have a relationship with that deep origin of life itself. And there were people who also understood what Abraham was saying and found it meaningful, etc. So from this we get this particular statement here, right? Ve'et hanefesh, the soul. Tana deve Eliyahu, right? Let's have this teaching from the school of Eliyahu. Sheshet alfei shnanin havu alma, have alma. The world, alma, the world will endure for 6,000 years. By the way, we're of course in 5,780, going into 86. We're getting towards the end of that time, right? And by the way, people are upset about, oh, well, can Judaism be true? I mean, the world we've shown is millions of years, if not billions of years old. The answer is we're talking about Adam. We're talking about since the time of history, right? Or recorded history, at least from a Jewish perspective. Maybe there are histories that go longer than that, but that's what we're referring to here. So anyway,
Could you explain that a little more? Because my understanding is that like civilization has been about 10,000 years.
yeah, but not documented necessarily that I know of. Okay.
Mhm.
As far as I know, maybe they're Chinese documents, but we're talking in a sense, you think about it, Adam is, by definition, not prehistoric man. Now, when they say civilization, that actually translates into the living in cities, right? It comes from a Latin word that means cities. I'm
Yeah.
not sure. Now, maybe there are cities that are 10,000 years old. I don't know. Or go back to, I just can't speak for it. But at least we're talking within the universe, so to speak, of Jewish history, the history of the Torah. And you'll see, we exactly talk about that. Whatever human beings existed prior to Adam they're not historical. Okay. There's no sense of progression, etc. Whatever subtle and deeper meanings the notion of history has, we're looking at historical time. At any rate, so it's not a deep contradiction here by any means. But what is interesting about this statement is it says there are 6,000 years, Shnei Alafim Tohu, 2,000 years of Tohu, meaning maybe we could say confusion. I like that idea. I'm not having obviously an easy time translating Tohu, and here I am irresponsibly not looking it up in Jastro. But basically we are talking about that. Shnei Alafim Torah. There were then 2,000 years, was followed by 2,000 years of Torah. Shnei Alafim Yemot HaMashiach. Unless this is to be pronounced as, I mean, it says Shnei Alafim, so if there were no Shnei, I'd say Alpayim, but whatever, right? The days of the Messiah. Umeimat have Shnei Alafim Torah. And from what point did those 2,000 years of Torah begin? Min ve'et hanefesh asher asu b'charan. From that moment when others besides Abraham and Sarah started to also become believers. All right. That's in Avodah Zarah. So we got through a part of this. Okay. Uh, I'm looking to see. Yes, we got all this part here. So I don't want to go over that in. Let's see. All right. Let's see something about here. For some reason, I thought this was actually longer. Okay. Yes, so Yud starts right over here, right? So we read this, right? And we got through this part here. And I said to you, right, V'chashbon shnei ha'alafim ad Avraham. So if you want to calculate, if you want to get out your pencil and paper and make sure I'm doing this accurately, please, by all means, do so. I would appreciate it. All right? So if we want to calculate how we get to 2,000 years until Abraham, hu pashut lefi horaot haktuvim b'parshiot hakodmot. It's clear, it's straightforward, right? From the proof of those statements in the earlier parshiot, right before Abraham. Lefi cheshbon shnei chaye Adam, according to the calculation of the years of Adam's life, Adam Harishon, the first man, v'haba'im acharav, and those who come after. In other words, the Torah has in it those calculations, those years, v'kabbalah etzel chazal, and there's a tradition amongst our early rabbis, right? De be'et she'asa Avraham et hanefashot, that moment when Abraham, quote, made those souls, right? Klomar, here we go. He gives you the understanding of what we mean by that. Klomar be'et shegairam, that is to say, that time when he converted them, right, when he made them converts. Haya bin Nun bet Shama, that Abraham was actually 52 years. So, yes, the Torah says that when Abraham was 75, that's when God said to Abraham, get you out of your father's house, etc. But Abraham, prior to that, had already, right, in his earlier years, had come upon, stumbled upon, or maybe it's more fair to say that he had given with deep, deep intelligence and reflection the gamut of the nature of human life, how briefly we are here, and the notion that anything that existed had to have a first cause that transcended the phenomenon itself. At any rate, however he came across those conclusions. So he was 52 years. Keep that in mind. Ien Seder HaOlam, I believe that's the book he's talking about, that there's some book which I haven't ever opened. I don't have it in my possession, but it is a chronology of the years given in the Bible, etc., and when things happen. Erech Avraham. So there must be an entry, Abraham. So in other words, his chronology. Uvazeh nishalem cheshbon hashnei alafim harishonim. And with this age, in other words, if we get to that 52, we complete the calculation of the 2,000 years that came before Abraham. So he doesn't actually do it for you. He says, go into the Bible, look through Genesis and Exodus, etc., etc., etc. Well, it's actually Genesis. Forgive me. It's only Genesis. Take a look at Genesis, look at the years involved, because it gives you the chronologies there. And if you calculate it up to Abraham's age at 52, you will get 2,000 years. V'cheshbon hashnei alafim hashniyim. But now we look at the calculation of the second 2,000 years. Hu min ha'et shegiyer Avraham et hanefashot. So we're saying that started from the moment that Abraham converted those souls, ad yemot HaMashiach, until we're saying the days of the Messiah. Shehu ad galut Yisrael me'admatam. We are talking about the time it took from the time when the Jewish people were exiled from their land. And we are talking about the second exile. We'll see. As I looked over this material before. Shemin As, and how he now explains Yemot HaMashiach. Because normally when we talk about Yemot HaMashiach, we think of a time when people will in fact recognize their divine author, etc., and the need to subscribe one's life to that divine authorship. Shemin As, that is from the time of the second exile, Hitchilu lekavot lagula. that is the moment when they started to yearn. And I'm translating this word. By the way, the word Hatikva, right? The anthem, Israeli national anthem, Hatikva, is so often translated as the hope. But it's so interesting. I actually had a discussion yesterday because we read Psalm 27, and at the end it says Kaveh, right? It says, so how do you translate that? And I'm thinking very carefully. The person who did that was translated as trust, but there is a Hebrew word for trust, betach, and it's in fact used elsewhere. So the kavod, to yearn. So if we translated hatikva instead of the hope as the yearning, right, that would make good sense. You're trying to translate Hebrew, right? So to yearn for the redemption, geula. Shahare, because indeed, me'et gerut hanefashot, right? Okay, so it's interesting. He is saying this, seems to be going, okay, he's now going over that second 2,000 years. He's saying from the time when those souls were converted, ad ledet Yitzchak, to the point when Isaac was born, avru menchet shana. We have to say there were 48 years, because if Abraham was 52, we know that he was 100 when Isaac was born. 100 minus 52, and you get 48, right? So, lefi cheshbon she'evenu la'el, this would be according to the calculation that we brought above, the be'et hazot, that is to say, at the time when these people were converted, haya Avraham ben Nun b'shana, he was 52 years old. ובעת לידת יצחק היה בן 100 שנה כנודע. And of course, when Isaac was born, he was 100 years, as is known, right? ו-60 שנה משנולד יצחק עד לידת יעקב. And we also read about how Isaac was 60 years old when Jacob was born. So, got to add that to the 48. Hare kuf chet shana. So we now wind up with 108 years. Look at how he's just deconstructing this to get that 2,000 years. Mead, are you keeping a running tally?
I will withhold comment.
Okay,
Continue.
okay. All right, now, so we have to add the Kuf Lamed Shana, and now we have to add to that another 130 years, Shahaya LeYaakov, that Jacob was, Keshebala Mitzrayim. He was 130 years old. He says that to Pharaoh. He tells him, I'm 130 years old. Hare Reish Lamed Chet Shana. So now we come to a total of 238 years. And now we've got 200. Reish Yud. Reish is 210 years. Shehayu b'Mitzrayim. The tradition is that they were in fact 210 years in Egypt from the point when Jacob arrived. And now we have a total of Taf Mem Chet, 448 years. Shema umishi yatsu miMitzrayim, and then from the point when they left Egypt, ad shenivne beitam bayit rishon, and up until the first temple was built, avru tat pe tet pe shana. So there was another 480 years that passed from the time of the Exodus in Egypt to the time when the first temple was built. How do we know this? Kedichtiv. As it states, it's written, B'binyan Bayit Rishon, when it came to the construction of the first temple, and the reference is Melachim Aleph, Kings 1, first book of Kings, chapter 6. And this is what it says, Vahi b'shmonim shana v'arba me'ot shana. And it was 80 years and 400 years, that Tzeit Bnei Yisrael me'eretz Yitzrayim, from the time of the Israelites departing from the land of Egypt. And so we now have a total of Hare, Taf, Kuf, Kav, Chet, Shana. That is 800. The Kuf weeks at 900. Look at that, we're getting very close, at least to 1,000, right? 928 years. Now, I do want to pause a moment and say the fact that in the Book of Kings, it directly connects the temple, the building of the temple, to the Exodus from Egypt, underscores, and by the way, this is reflected in the song Dayenu that the whole reason for getting out of the land of Egypt, for being freed from slavery in Egypt, was so that the temple could ultimately be built. And I would say that if I were to see that as a metaphor, I would say that what it is saying, in a sense, is that if we put all our value into living in the physical universe, if we see nothing but physical universe as the sum and substance and purpose of living, we are actually enslaving ourselves in the metaphorical land of Egypt. And that understanding that we actually have that capability once we are able to free ourselves from that particular notion of putting all our eggs in that basket, we have, in fact, at the stage of building the temple and realizing the vast potential that consciousness and human life gives us. So I believe that. I see the slavery in Egypt as being a general metaphor for addiction, for whatever kinds of addictions there are out there. And addictions are, in fact, slaveries. You're enslaved to that addiction, that you need the divine help in getting out of that addiction, and that it allows you then to experience life as a free person, but truly as the conduit. You can now become the conduit of the divine into this world, which is something that imbues us with extraordinary significance, even as we live very modest lives. Anyway, sermon for the day. Onwards. So we are now at 928 years from the time when Abraham made these converts. V'taf Yud Shana, and so now we have another 410 years, She'amad Bayit Rishon, during which the temple, that first temple, stood for 410 years. Kedemuchache kra'e, it says, as the scriptural verses prove, al pi cheshbon shnot hamelachim, because it tells you how long those kings reigned. This is found in the book of Kings, and if you start calculating the various reigns of the kings and how long they reigned for, we will get to this calculation. All right. So now we get up to the years the temple was in existence, the first temple, Veshivim Shana to Galut Bavel, and we know that the first exile in Babylonia lasted for 70 years. And if we add V'taf Kaf Shana Shamad Bayit Sheni, so that was until the second temple was built, and that second temple existed for 420 years. Hooray, now we go, Besaf HaKol. If you total all those numbers up, you get Alpaim Shana, you get 2,000 years, Pachot Kuf Ayin Bet, less 172 years. So 172 years less than 2,000. So what about that? The Kuf Ayin Bet Kodem Hashlamat Arba Alafim. So, and 175 years prior to the completion of the 4,000 years, Necharav Habayit. At that point, the temple was destroyed. At that point, Ulasof Utan Kuf Ayin Bet, and at the end of that 172, sorry, I said 75, I meant 172, Nishlamu Shnei Alfei Torah. And at the end of that 172 years, the years of Torah came to a completion. They were ended. So, V'cheshbon Shnei Alafim, sorry, Yemot HaMashiach. Now, how about the calculation of the two?
Can we back up a second?
Yes.
Explain that years of the completion of the Torah, if you can.
Okay. What we're saying is that even though the temple may have been destroyed, there
Yes.
was enough. I think this is what he's saying, is there still was a residue of deep commitment to Torah, that despite the fact that the temple had been destroyed for 172 years, there's still, that still would have been the period of the Tanaim. The Tanaim, okay, so actually think about it. Temple was destroyed in CE 70.
Right.
And the Mishnah was
200
redacted
thereabouts.
200, okay? So that leaves you with about 100 and, right? Let's see, I'm sorry. Yeah, 130 years, right?
Right. So it leaves you about
There you
42
go.
years.
Yeah, okay, all right. So, I mean, you
Okay.
don't have to be middak, right? I mean, we're still talking about a good estimate, right? So,
Okay.
and even so, while the Mishnah was redacted, or put together, etc., there was so a
Okay.
lot for a few years then. I mean,
Fine.
less than how many years?
I just wasn't sure what the phrase meant, so that's
Yes,
why
I
I
don't know.
asked. Yeah.
It made total worthy question,
Okay.
totally legitimate,
All
totally
right.
legitimate. Okay, so getting on, thank you, and thank you for doing that. I'm wondering, given our time constraints, we have quite a bit more to go here, as you can see. We have all of this down here, and I'm wondering if we should leave this to tomorrow because it doesn't end until over here.
Okay.
So let's stop here because we're looking at the third set of 2,000 years, okay?
Okay.
We'll stop today for today, and I'm hoping we can pick this up tomorrow at our
Okay.
next lesson.
All right.
So I'm gonna
I will be incommunicado for a couple of days as I have an early
okay,
morning commitment tomorrow, traveling Tuesday,
understand,
hopefully
understand.
back Wednesday.
Okay, well, this hopefully
But
will be
you
recorded.
record it so I can go back and look.
Correct. So hopefully, if you think it's interesting and worthy,
Yep.
you will, in fact,
And you'll be spared my comments.
not it. Please stop it. We are not into the self-deprecation derby. Okay, I'm going to stop
Okay.
the recording. Okay.
Very good.